Have you ever been watching a movie and it's like suddenly all the actors start talking and fast forward?
Yeah.
You're just left there struggling to understand what they're saying.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Like you almost need the subtitles even though they're speaking English.
It definitely happens.
And like especially if it's a movie where they're using a lot of slang,
Right.
or it's a movie that maybe takes place in a place with a very particular accent.
Absolutely.
It can be tough.
It can.
So today on our deep dive, we're going to talk all about understanding native English speakers.
Yes, we are.
And I'm so excited to have you here.
I am excited to be here.
So let's just jump right into it.
Okay.
Why do native English speakers talk so fast?
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's really all about efficiency, I think. Like when we're communicating with each other, we want to do it
Right.
quickly. And we want to do
Yeah.
it in a way that just feels natural.
Yeah.
So over time, the language evolves and certain sounds start to get compressed and words kind of blend together.
Right.
And we almost develop a type of shorthand.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So like a verbal shorthand?
Exactly.
So like a good example of this that I hear all the time is like, what ya doing?
Right? Yeah.
Instead of, what are you doing?
That's a perfect example.
Or I don't know. Instead of,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know is much more common than I don't know in everyday speech.
Absolutely. And so for someone who's learning English, they might be hearing those phrases and be like, wait, what did you just say?
Right. And they're trying to think of all those individual words.
Right.
But what they need to start to do is listen for those chunks.
Okay.
So they're not getting stuck on the individual words,
Right.
but rather they're listening for those key phrases and letting their brain kind of fill in the gaps.
Oh, that's a really good tip. I like that.
Yeah.
It's like listening for the melody of a song rather than every individual night.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to touch upon is this idea of like classroom English versus real world English.
Yes.
You spend all this time learning grammar, learning vocabulary.
You're studying very formal, very proper ways of speaking.
Exactly. And then you get out in the real world and you're like, wait a second.
And everyone's breaking all the rules.
Yeah. What's going on?
Well, not breaking the rules, but they're definitely using a much more casual way of speaking.
Yeah. And like they're using slang and like they're maybe not enunciating every single syllable like we talked about.
Exactly.
So how can people kind of bridge that gap?
Well, it's important to remember that classroom English gives you that foundation.
Right.
It's the building blocks.
Yeah.
But real world English is a living, breathing thing.
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving.
Right.
So we're not throwing out those rules that we learn.
Right.
But rather we're building upon them. And we're using them in a way that feels natural and authentic.
Right.
So like even something as simple as asking someone to fill out a form.
Right.
In a classroom, you might say, please fill out this form.
Right.
But in real life, you might say, hey, can you fill this out real quick?
Yeah. Or even just like fill this out.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I think it's important for English language learners to remember that like the textbook is a great starting point.
Right.
But it's not the end all be all.
No, it's not.
Of learning the language.
Exactly.
So how do you recommend people kind of immerse themselves in more real world English?
Well, I think watching movies and TV shows is a fantastic way to do that.
Okay.
Because you're seeing how people actually use the language in everyday situations.
Right. It's true.
Yeah. And you're hearing all those different expressions and the slang.
Yeah.
And you're picking up on those different ways of speaking. It's true.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole other layer on top of that, which is like accents.
Oh, yes.
Because the English-speaking world is so diverse.
It is.
We have American English, we have British English, we have Australian English.
And Canadian.
Oh, yeah, Canadian English.
And all within those countries, there are all these regional accents.
Oh, my gosh, so many.
So it's really a tapestry of different ways of speaking.
It is.
And I think that that's what makes the language so interesting.
It does.
Is that it's constantly evolving and changing based on where you are and who you're talking to.
Right.
It is.
And I think a good example of that is like when I first heard someone say, y'all.
Right.
It took me a second to realize they were just saying you all.
Yeah.
But it was like a regional variation that I'd never heard before.
And there are so many
of
those little variations.
So many.
Like even something like cheers,
right?
In the UK, that can mean thank you. Oh, that's right. It's not just for
toasting.
Toasting.
It can be a way of expressing gratitude.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So it's fascinating how those little regional differences can really change the meaning of words and phrases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for listeners who are listening to this and they're thinking, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
so many accents,
Mm-hmm.
so many regional variations, how do I even begin to,
It can feel overwhelming.
how do I even begin to tackle this?
It can.
What would your advice be?
Well, I think the first thing is to not get overwhelmed
Okay.
and to start with what interests you.
Okay.
So if you're really interested in British culture,
Right.
maybe focus on understanding British accents first.
Right.
Or if you're really into American movies,
Okay.
focus on American accents.
I like that. Start with what you like.
Yeah, start with what interests you.
Yeah.
And use subtitles as
Yeah.
a tool
Good bit.
to help you really understand what's
Yeah.
being said.
Great advice.
Yeah.
What's this? So we've talked about speed.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about like classroom English versus real world English.
Yeah.
We've talked about accents.
Yes.
And there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, which is slang.
Oh, yes.
Because slang is almost like the secret language
it is.
of native English speakers.
It's like a code
Yeah.
that only insiders know.
And it can make you feel like you're really part of the
You're in it.
in-group.
Yes, definitely.
But it can also be very confusing
It can be very
for
confusing.
people who are learning English.
Yeah, especially because
Mhm.
it changes so quickly.
Oh my gosh, it changes all the time.
It does.
Like what's popular slang today
Yeah.
might be totally outdated tomorrow.
Exactly.
So how do you even keep up with it all?
Well, it's tough,
Yeah.
even for native speakers.
Right?
I think
Yeah.
it's all about context.
Okay.
You're not going to know every single slang term,
All right.
but if you can start to understand
Yeah.
the most common ones,
Yeah.
and you pay attention to how they're being used,
Yeah.
you can start to unlock
Right.
a deeper level of
Yeah.
understanding of the language.
So let's dive into some examples.
Okay, let's do it.
What are some of the slang terms that you think are really common right now?
Okay, well, let's start with I can't even.
Oh, yeah. I love that one.
It's a good one.
I use that one all the time.
And it's not literally about not being able to do something. It's about being so overwhelmed
Yes.
by a situation.
Usually in like a humorous,
Yes.
like a humorous way.
Like if something's so shocking or so funny, you just say, I can't even deal with this right now.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's a good one.
What about that's lit?
Okay, so that's lit
Mm-hmm.
basically means that something is amazing or exciting
Okay.
or impressive.
Okay.
So it could be a party that's really fun.
Right.
It could be a new song that you really like.
Okay.
It could even be like a meal that you just had that was,
Really good.
yeah.
I love it. Okay.
So it's just a way of saying something is really cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like it.
And then another one that I think
Yeah.
a lot of people have heard of is ghosting.
Ooh, yeah.
And this is not a pleasant one,
No.
but it's when someone just disappears
Right.
from your life without any explanation.
Yeah.
So they're not responding to your texts.
Yeah.
They're not answering your calls.
Yeah.
They've basically just ghosted you.
Right.
They've vanished.
Yeah. It's tough.
It is tough. And unfortunately, it's
Yeah.
just become quite common,
It is common.
especially in the dating world.
Yeah.
So
And it's something that
Is it?
people learning English should be aware of because it's
Yeah.
out there.
it's out there.
Yeah.
It's a real thing.
So do you think that in order to understand native English speakers,
Yeah.
people need to become like fluent in slang?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's more about being aware
Okay.
that it exists.
Right. And paying attention to how it's used.
Yeah.
And it's just gradually building your understanding over time.
Right.
It's not about knowing every single term.
Yeah.
It's about being able to recognize it
Right.
and understand the general meaning.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've covered the speed. We've covered
Yeah.
classroom English versus real world English.
Yeah.
We've covered accents. We've covered slang.
We've covered a lot.
so much good stuff.
Yeah.
But what can our listeners actually do to improve
Yes.
their understanding of native English speakers?
Well, I think the most important thing is immersion.
Okay.
Surround yourself with the language as much as possible.
Okay.
So watch movies, watch TV shows, listen to podcasts,
Gotcha.
read books, read articles,
Okay.
anything you can do to just expose yourself
Right.
to the language.
So it's not just about studying it. It's about,
Exactly.
this is a
It's
fun-
about experiencing it.
yeah,
It's about immersing yourself in it.
I like that.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the power of subtitles.
Oh, yeah. Subtitles are great.
Subtitles are fantastic because they allow you to connect
Yeah.
the spoken word
Right.
with the written word.
Yeah.
So you're not only hearing it, but you're also seeing it.
Right.
And that can really help with comprehension.
Yeah, especially if it's like an unfamiliar accent or something.
Absolutely.
Subtitles can be really helpful.
Yeah, they're a great tool.
I like to think of them as like training wheels
I like that.
for your ears.
Training wheels for your ears. That's a great analogy.
And I also wanted to ask you about this technique called shadowing.
Oh, yes. Shadowing is fantastic.
I've heard about it, but I've never actually tried it.
It's a great technique.
So tell me a little bit about it.
Okay, so basically with shadowing, you're listening to a native speaker
Right.
and you're trying to repeat what they're saying.
So like immediately after they say it, you're
As closely as possible, yeah.
repeating it.
Exactly. So you're
Yeah.
matching their rhythm,
Okay.
their intonation, their
So
pronunciation.
you're like a vocal echo.
You're a vocal echo. You're mirroring them.
That's cool.
And it can feel a little awkward at first,
Yeah.
but it's a really powerful way
Yeah.
to develop
Yeah.
a more natural flow and to improve your pronunciation.
Right.
So you're training your mouth
Right.
to make those sounds
Right.
that native speakers make.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And then what about phrasal verbs?
Oh, phrasal verbs, they're tricky,
They're so tricky.
but they're so important
They are.
because they're used all the time
Yes.
in everyday English.
Yeah.
And basically, a phrasal verb is when you combine a verb
Right.
with a preposition
Right.
or an adverb,
Yeah.
and together they create a new meaning.
Right. And that meaning
Yeah.
is not always obvious.
Not always obvious from the individual words.
Right.
So a good example is take off,
Right.
right? It can mean to remove clothing.
Yeah.
It can mean to depart on a plane.
Right.
It can even mean to like suddenly become successful.
Right.
So one little phrase, so many different meanings.
So many, and it all depends on the
It all depends on the context.
context. Exactly. So how do you recommend people kind of approach learning phrasal verbs?
I think the best way is to just encounter them
Okay.
in real life situations.
All right.
So when you're watching a movie
Right.
or reading a book
Yeah.
and you come across a phrasal verb,
Right.
don't be afraid to jot it down.
Okay.
Look it up.
Right.
See what it means in that particular context.
Gotcha.
And then try to use it yourself
Okay.
in your own conversations.
Great advice.
So it's really about
Yeah.
active learning,
Yeah.
you know,
Oh.
not just passive studying.
So we've got immersion, we've got shadowing,
Yeah.
we've got tackling those phrasal verbs.
Yep.
Are there any other strategies you would recommend for people
Yeah.
to really actively engage with the language?
Well, I think one of the best ways
Yeah.
to improve your fluency
Yeah.
and your confidence
Yeah.
is to actually have conversations with native speakers.
Makes sense.
So whether that's through
yeah.
a language exchange program
Right.
or finding a conversation partner online or just talking to people
Right.
in your community
Yeah.
who are native English speakers,
Absolutely.
there's no substitute for
Yeah.
actually using the language.
Yeah, it's like taking your English skills
Yeah.
out for a test drive in the real world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's where the rubber meets the road.
But that kind of leads me to a question that I've been thinking about,
Okay.
which is like, in order to understand native English speakers,
Yeah.
do we have to sound exactly like them?
That's a great question.
Do we have to get rid of our accents?
That's a really important point.
Do we have to like completely
Yeah.
conform?
The answer is no.
Okay, good.
Fluency doesn't equal
Yeah.
conformity.
Right.
It's fantastic to be able to
Yeah.
understand and
I see.
communicate
Yeah.
effectively with native speakers.
Well-
But that doesn't mean you have to lose your own unique voice.
So you're saying it's okay if I still say tomato, like tomato.
I love how you say tomato.
Okay, good.
That's part of what makes you, you.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So I don't have
Yeah.
to like completely erase who I am
No.
as a speaker.
No, your accent is
Yeah.
part of your identity.
Yeah.
It's part of your personal history
Right.
with the language.
Right.
And it's something to be celebrated,
Okay, I like that.
not something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, so it's more about expanding our ability to
Exact.
communicate with others.
It's about expanding your horizons and
Yeah.
being able to connect
Right.
with people from different cultures and
Mhm.
different backgrounds.
Absolutely.
And it's not about becoming someone you're not.
Right. It's not about trying to sound like
Yeah. Hey,
a carbon copy of.
yeah, you don't have to erase yourself.
Yeah.
You can still be you
I like that.
and be fluent in English.
I feel much better now.
Good.
So as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive
Yeah.
into understanding native English speakers,
Yeah.
what is like the one key takeaway that you want
Okay.
our listeners to remember?
Embrace the journey.
Ooh, I like that.
You know, learning a language,
Right.
especially understanding all the nuances
Yeah.
of how it's used in the real world.
Yeah,
It's an ongoing process.
it is.
It takes time.
Yeah.
And it takes effort.
Right.
And there will be moments of frustration.
Totally.
There will be moments of confusion.
I've had many.
We all have.
Yeah.
But there will also be moments of joy and
Right.
discovery and
Yeah.
connection
Absolutely.
that make it all worthwhile.
Yeah, it's true.
So don't give up.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah.
And enjoy the process.
Right. It's like exploring a new city.
It is.
You know, you're going to get lost a couple times.
You might take a wrong turn, but that's all part of the adventure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those wrong turns are usually how you find like the hidden gems.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to
Yes.
make mistakes.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to experiment with different learning techniques.
Yeah.
Um,
And celebrate every
y-
milestone,
yeah.
no matter how small.
I like that.
Yeah,
Because they all add up
they do.
in the end.
And I think it's important to remember, too, that, like, you're not alone in this.
You're not alone at all.
There's a whole community
There is.
of English language learners out there.
Absolutely.
And so many resources
so many resources.
available to help you along the way.
And don't be afraid
Yeah.
to connect with other learners.
Right?
You know,
Yeah.
share your experiences, share
Yeah.
your tips.
Right.
Celebrate your successes together.
Absolutely.
Because learning a language
Yeah.
is always more fun
It is.
when you're doing it with others.
It is.
So find your people.
Yes.
Support each other
Yes.
along the way.
Well, on that note, to all of our listeners out there who are on this
Yes.
amazing and sometimes challenging
Yeah.
journey of learning English, we applaud you.
We do.
We're here to support you,
We are.
and you're doing amazing.
Keep going.
Keep going.
You got this.
You got this.
And you know, each accent that you encounter adds another layer
Yeah.
to your understanding.
No, I thought.
It's like adding spices to a dish.
Yeah.
You know, it just makes it
I love that.
more interesting, more flavorful.
Speaking of flavor, let's talk about slang.
Okay.
Because slang is like the secret language
Yeah, it is.
that native English speakers use.
It is.
It can be really fun and dynamic,
Yeah.
but it can also be so confusing.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I feel like sometimes I need a decoder ring
I know.
to figure out what people are saying.
Especially because it changes so quickly.
Oh my gosh, all the time.
Yeah, what's cool today.
Yeah. Might be totally outdated tomorrow.
Right.
So it's a challenge.
So how do you even keep up with it?
Well, you know,
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah.
Even for native speakers, we don't know every single slang term
Right.
that's out there.
Okay.
But I think the most important thing is to just be aware
Okay.
that it exists
Right.
and to pay attention to how it's being used.
Yeah.
And to gradually build your understanding over time.
So you don't need to like memorize the Urban Dictionary?
You don't need to know every single word.
Okay.
Just be aware
Right.
of the most common ones,
Yes.
and you'll be able to understand
Okay.
most conversations.
So what are some examples of some common slang terms?
Okay, well, let's start with I can't even.
Okay, I love that one.
It's a classic.
It is.
And it's not literally about not being able to do something.
Right.
It's more about expressing a feeling
Right.
of being completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, like I can't even deal with this right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like too much
Yeah.
to handle.
Yeah, I love that one.
It's a good one.
What about that's lit?
Okay, so that's lit.
Does it literally mean that it's on fire?
No, not literally.
Oh.
It just means that something is really amazing
Right.
or exciting or impressive.
Okay.
So you could use it to describe
Right.
a party, a new song, a really delicious meal,
Okay.
anything that you think is just really cool.
That's lit.
Yeah, that's lit.
I like it.
And then another one
Yeah.
that I think a lot of people are familiar with, unfortunately, is ghosting.
Yeah.
And ghosting is when someone just suddenly disappears
Right.
from your life
Yeah.
without any explanation.
Like they vanished into thin air.
Exactly.
A ghost.
Like a ghost.
Yeah.
And it's not a fun experience,
It's not.
but it's something that unfortunately
It is.
happens quite often,
Especially online.
especially in the online world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's something that people learning English
Yes,
should be aware of.
exactly. Because it might happen to them.
It might.
And it's helpful to know what
Uh,
that means.
To know what's going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So we've talked about the speed of native English speakers.
Yeah.
We've talked about classroom English versus real world English.
Right.
We've talked about accents. And now we've talked about slang.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have so much good stuff.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who are at home right now
Yeah.
and they're thinking, okay, I want to be able to understand native English speakers better.
Yes.
What are some practical tips that they can do?
Yeah. Okay, well, I think one of the best tips
Yeah.
is to immerse yourself in the language
Okay.
as much as possible.
Okay.
So watch movies Watch TV shows, listen to podcasts, read books,
Okay.
read articles.
So, like, really surround yourself with it.
Surround yourself with it.
Okay.
Don't just study it, experience it, live it,
I like that.
breathe it.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to use subtitles.
Oh, yeah. Subtitles are great.
Subtitles are your friend.
They are.
They can really help you
Yeah.
to connect the spoken word with the written word,
Right.
and that can be really helpful,
Especially for unfamiliar accents.
especially for unfamiliar accents
Right.
or when you're trying to pick up on slang.
Right.
So don't be afraid to turn on those subtitles.
Yeah. Like, they're training wheels for your ears.
Training wheels for your ears, yeah.
I've also heard about this technique called shadowing.
Oh, yes. Shadowing is fantastic.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
So basically, with shadowing,
Yeah.
you listen to a native speaker
Right.
and you try to repeat
Okay.
what they're saying
So, like, almost immediately after they say it,
as closely as
we
possible.
repeat it.
Exactly. So
Right.
you're matching their rhythm,
Okay.
their intonation, their pronunciation.
So you're like a vocal echo.
You are a vocal echo, exactly. You're
Got you.
mirroring them.
Okay.
And it can feel a little awkward at first,
I bet.
but it's a really powerful way to
Yeah.
develop a more natural flow. Yeah.
And to really improve your pronunciation.
So it's like training your mouth
First,
to
yeah.
make the sounds that native speakers make.
Exactly. You're training your muscles
Okay.
to work in a different way.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I like that.
And then we have those tricky phrasal verbs.
Oh, yeah.
So phrasal verbs,
I feel like they're the bane of every
they can be tough.
English language learner's existence.
I can be.
What exactly is a phrasal verb?
So a phrasal verb is basically when you take a verb
Okay.
and you combine it
Right.
with a preposition
Right.
or an adverb,
Yeah.
and together they create a new meaning.
Right. And that meaning is not always obvious.
Not always obvious from the individual words.
Right.
So a good example is take off,
Okay.
right? It can mean to remove clothing.
Yeah.
It can mean to depart on a plane.
Yeah.
It can mean to like suddenly become successful.
Right.
So one little phrase,
So many meanings.
so many different meanings,
Yeah.
and it all depends on the context.
Yeah.
Right? It all depends on how it's used.
Exactly.
So what's your advice for people who are trying to learn?
Well, I think the best way
Hmm.
is to encounter them in real life situations.
Okay.
So when you're watching a movie or
Right.
reading a book
Yeah.
and you come across a phrasal verb that you don't know,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to jot it down.
Okay.
Look it up.
Okay.
See what it means in that particular context.
Right.
And then try to use it yourself.
Okay.
So it's about that active learning,
Yeah.
really engaging with the language.
So we've got immersion.
Yes.
We've got shadowing.
Yeah.
We've got tackling phrasal verbs.
Yeah.
Are there any other strategies that you would recommend?
Yeah. I think another great strategy is to actually have conversations
Okay.
with native English speakers.
Makes sense.
So whether that's through a language exchange program or finding a conversation partner online
Right.
or just talking to people
Right.
in your community, there's really no substitute
Right.
for actually using the language.
It's like taking your English skills out for a test drive.
Exactly.
But that kind of leads me to a question
Okay.
that I've been thinking about a lot lately,
Yeah.
which is like, in order to understand native English speakers,
Yeah.
do we have to sound exactly like them?
That's a really great question.
Like, do we have to completely get rid of our accents?
That's a really important point.
Do we have to, like, completely conform?
And the answer is no.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Fluency does not equal conformity.
Okay.
It's fantastic
Yeah.
to be able to understand and
Uh-huh.
communicate effectively
Yeah.
with native speakers.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you have to lose
Right.
your own unique voice.
So you're saying it's okay if I still say tomato.
I love how you say tomato.
Okay, phew.
It's charming.
So I don't need to erase my accent.
You don't need to erase your accent.
Okay, good.
Your accent is part of your identity. It's
Yeah.
part of your personal history
Yeah.
with the language.
Yeah.
And it's something to be celebrated,
Right. I like that.
not something to be ashamed of.
I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders.
Good.
So it's more about expanding our ability to communicate.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's about
right.
expanding your horizons.
Right.
Being able to connect
Yeah.
with people from different cultures,
Yeah.
different backgrounds.
I love that.
And it's not about
Yeah.
becoming someone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's not about trying to sound like
Exactly.
with a carbon copy of someone else.
Yeah. You don't have to erase yourself.
Yeah.
You can still be you
I like
and
that.
be fluent in English.
I feel so much better.
Good.
So as we kind of wrap up this part of our
Okay.
deep dive,
Yeah.
what is like the one key takeaway that
Right.
you want our listeners to remember?
Embrace the journey.
Well, I love that.
You know,
Yeah.
learning a language,
Yes.
right, especially understanding how it's used
Right.
in the real world.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
It is.
It takes time
Yeah.
and it takes effort.
It does.
And there will be moments of frustration.
Oh, yeah.
There will be moments
I've had many.
confusion,
Yeah.
but there will also be moments of joy
Absolutely.
and discovery
Yeah.
and connection
It's true.
that make it all worthwhile.
And the connections you make are just so
Yeah.
valuable.
They are, so
Yeah.
don't give up.
Yeah.
Keep going
Yeah.
and enjoy the process.
It's like exploring a new city.
It is.
You're going to get lost a couple times.
You might take a wrong turn,
Yeah.
but that's all part of the adventure.
Exactly. And it's those wrong turns
Exactly.
that usually lead to like the best discoveries.
That's right.
Yeah.
You find those hidden gems.
So don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to like try different things.
Experiment.
Yeah. Experiment.
Try different techniques.
And celebrate those little wins.
Celebrate every milestone, no matter how small,
Yeah.
because it all adds up in the end.
Yeah. And
You're
remember,
not alone.
you're not alone.
There's a whole community of English language learners out there
Absolutely.
who are going through the same things,
Yeah.
who are facing the same challenges. And there are so many resources
Yeah.
available
So
to
many.
help you along the way.
And don't be afraid to reach out.
Yes, connect with other learners.
Connect with the other learners.
Share your experiences.
Share your
Share your tips.
Yeah.
Celebrate your successes together.
Yeah. It's so much more fun
It is.
when you have a community
Yeah,
of people who are kind of going through
Absolutely.
this same thing.
Find your people
Yes.
and support each other
Support each other.
along the way.
I love that.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening out there, you are not alone.
No, you're not.
We are all in this together,
We are.
and you're doing great.
You're doing amazing.
Keep going.
Keep going.
You got this.
You got this. And remember,
Yeah.
the goal isn't to sound exactly like someone else. It's to find your own voice
Yeah.
within the language.
I love that.
Yeah, so keep exploring. Keep practicing.
Yeah.
And most importantly, have fun with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This has been such a great conversation.
It has. I've really enjoyed it.
I've learned so much.
Me too.
And to our listeners out there,
Yes.
keep up the amazing work.
Keep learning, keep practicing.
You're doing great.
You got this.
And we'll see you next time.